was the #1 purchase to have with us. It was sunscreen. So
Mass quantities.
it was crazy.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the M&A Forum, Deal Makers at Work. We welcome you here today as we take our monthly meetings online. And so this will be the second in our series. And we're very fortunate today to have the team from G&A Partners who will be lead the bulk of our discussion here this morning. But before we get started, my name is Austin Tennett. I'll be your host and moderator this morning, and I have the fortunate pleasure of serving as secretary to the M&A Forum. But before we get into the presentation from G&A Partners, let's hear a few words from our president, Bob Vincent. Bob?
Thanks, Austin. Good morning or afternoon, whichever, to everybody. As Austin mentioned, this is our second online meeting. I think we're starting to get the hang of this thing. One thing that I've noticed about this is that since we are virtual and online, it has extended the reach of the forum outside our usual geographic area. We've had some attendees from the Dallas area and a couple of other areas that we don't usually see in our face-to-face meetings. So I think the board is going to have to sit down and look at that situation and see how we can use it going forward to our advantage. We also, last Thursday, had a virtual happy hour, which was a lot of fun. We had about a dozen people showed up for an hour, and actually there was some deal making going on in the happy hour. So I thought it was a great success. We're going to try to do that again. So we're looking forward to getting back on our regular schedule, right, Austin, once a month?
Yeah,
on our virtual meetings on the 4th Tuesday.
Yeah, so absolutely.
We're looking forward to seeing everybody online as long as this current situation lasts. And like I said, we're going to investigate what we can do with this new toy we've got here online. So stay tuned for some announcements here in the near future. Take it away, Austin.
Great, thanks so much. Bob, did you want to say something about our pay it forward activities?
I'll let Mike do that if he wants to.
Mike?
Yeah, thanks, Bob. Just a quick note. I'm sure probably everybody has caught at least one newscast, regardless of the network, regarding the challenges that food banks around the country are having. The M&A Forum over the past couple of years has been donating time, one full evening at least, or maybe two during the year. The means and the inclination, if you go help out the food bank, there's a connection, or you can go to their website and you can donate there. This will take you to the website. The other place that we've helped out we did last year, Medical Bridges, which is run by Walter Ulrich. And Walter tells us that they have stopped, I guess, for the moment, going out to the foreign countries, and they've been providing medical supplies to the rural areas in the United States. So once again, the challenge of getting volunteers all together around a table is clear at this moment. But again, if you have the means or so inclined, there's a way to connect with Walter's organization, which is again providing medical supplies out into the rural areas of the United States right now. Normally they're going to places like the Bahamas and Haiti and things like that. So again, maybe hopefully we'll be able to get around the table at the food bank or around Walter's table one of these days. But in the meantime, if you think about it, if you feel inclined, please check on one or both of these organizations that we've been supporting here. Okay, Austin, thanks everybody for your attention on that.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate that. Okay, so now we get into the why we are all here. So the title of our session here today is Human Resources Strategies that support people through COVID-19 and re-engages them on the other side. So what I'd like to do, just kind of a little housekeeping here, I'm going to put everybody on mute. And what I'm going to ask is that if our G&A panelists, if you would just go ahead and manually unmute yourselves as we participate in the discussion. So what we're going to do is we have a lot of great information to cover this morning. So what we're going to ask you to do is to, as you have questions and comments, please put them in the chat box. And then at the end, I'm going to coordinate with our fellow member, Gretchen Lawler, and she'll be monitoring the chat room, and then we'll spend some time at the end to answer all your questions and address your comments. So so why don't we just go ahead and get started? So Dave, the first question for you. You're the lucky one. And just make sure you're unmuted, if you will. But if you'd be so kind, I think most of us know that G&A Partners is a HR consulting PEO firm. But could you maybe tell us a little bit about, the kind of what is your sweet spot in terms of the size of clients, revenue, and/or employees?
Sure, I'd love to. So G&A Partners provides professional employer organization services, or PEO services, to clients of all sizes. We have clients in all states across the U.S., and we work with employers anywhere from 2 employees up to over 1,000 employees. And we have several clients that are in that over 1,000 space. And so we really work with all different sizes and do everything from payroll to full benefits and 401k services and other types of HR advice and counseling. So we're a full service PEO, and right now, especially when there's so many different issues going around that employers have questions about, we've been doing a lot of work to support them and help them and really fulfill our role as their HR service provider.
That's great. That's great. Thank you so much for that nice intro. So while we have you in the hot spot there, Dave, can you just maybe share with any breaking or insider news that's kind of on the regulatory front? We know that the rules are changing on an almost hourly basis.
Right. So with regards specifically to everything going on with COVID-19, right now, there have been a couple of major legislative developments over the past 4 weeks. And so specifically, the first legislation that President Trump signed into law several weeks ago is the FFCRA, the Families First Coronavirus Relief Act. And this act was put together surprisingly quickly for our Congress, but basically in less than a week, they put together the FFCRA, which provides for a couple of significant things for this group. There's other elements in it, like school lunch programs and student loan relief, but specifically for businesses, there's the emergency paid sick leave and paid family medical leave programs, which employers can tap into for their employees relating to COVID-19 issues. So for example, the emergency paid sick leave, there are 6 reasons for which an employee can benefit from these 2 weeks of paid sick leave. And then the paid family medical leave is continues, overlaps with paid sick leave for the first 2 weeks, and then the pay kicks in under the paid family medical leave for weeks 3 through 12. And for that, there's only one reason that actually qualifies an employee, and that's if they have a minor child who's at home and because of their school or daycare is closed because of COVID-19 reasons. So that's the FFCRA. And then a couple weeks later, Congress passed and President Trump signed the CARES Act, which provides additional relief and established several loan programs and other types of relief and expanded unemployment benefits, et cetera. So those are the two big developments on the regulatory and legislative front that we wanted to kick off as part of our discussion today.
Great. Thanks for sharing that, Dave. Lisa, anything that you would like to add to that? You know, maybe something here in the last 72 hours, because I know it's a moving target.
Sure. So there is some speculation that some of the loan money under the Paycheck Protection Program, which is the SBA Section 7A extension of loans under the CARES Act, that some of that loan money might be running out. I don't know if that's true or not, but I know that Congress is planning to provide additional funding to support that program, as well as there's some talk about potentially adding aid for businesses that have more than 500 employees. Mm-hmm. There's some activities going on in the state and local legislatures, some initiatives that add to the complexity. You know, we've just, Dave just talked about the pay sick leave that's extended through the FFCRA, but we also have some state and local laws that are cropping up that are, you know, talking about sick leave laws that may allow sick time for self-quarantine. So you just have to know which laws are applicable, and in most cases you need to apply the most generous law that benefits employees.
You know, that's interesting you mentioned that, because I think we all hear a lot about what's going on at the federal level, but not a lot of time is spent on what's happening either state specific. So just to, I mean, I think most of our callers our guests are from the Texas area. Is there anything specific that the state of Texas might be doing that's you know, different from or in addition to what the federal guidelines are?
I'm not aware of Texas. I'm seeing a lot of activity, obviously, in California, but you know, each city has their own sick leave law, so they're spending time wisely to benefit their own employees, or not wisely, however you determine. I haven't seen anything with Texas, but this, you know, I think we're going to see more and more of this because they, you know, they have a little more time on their hands to think through some of this, and so they're having to react to the needs of their constituents.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Hey, Dave, let's swing back to you. Kind of one of those top of mind questions. It's around this whole the employees, the conversation around, do I lay them off? What are the unemployment benefit scenarios? What are they looking like? Do I keep them on my payroll and fund them through some of the governmental programs, part of the stimulus program? What should we be thinking about in regards to that?
Yeah, that's definitely top of mind for many employers right now. Prior to the CARES Act, we had a lot of our clients calling us and saying, look, we just we don't have work right now. We're not considered essential, and so we need to send everybody home. Should we just lay them off or furlough them or what? And then the CARES Act came out and attached a really big carrot for employers to hold on to their employees because of the payroll protection program. And so the PPP has really created a difficult situation for a lot of employers, because if they were to lay those employees off, they would jeopardize some of the loan forgiveness that's incorporated into these loan programs that are part of the CARES Act. And so our advice to employers is really to do the number crunching to figure out whether or not they're better off holding on to employees so that they can meet the employee retention requirements for the loan forgiveness that's part of the program, or whether they're better off not taking the loans and letting employees go. And so that's, we can't give a one size fits all. So again, employers really need to run those numbers, but there definitely is a greater incentive now to hold on to your employees and take advantage of some of those loans that are available. The other consideration is from the employee's perspective. Most states now, due to the incentives that have been provided through the CARES Act for unemployment, now are waiving the 1 week wait period to get unemployment benefits. And they're also making it so that employees who are furloughed, which means in this case that they're not actually terminated or laid off, they're still on the books as employees, but they're just not able to work for the time being, they can qualify in some cases for unemployment benefits. And on top of the normal state benefits, the CARES Act provides an additional sum of money available to employees that are getting unemployment benefits. So there's some benefits there that employees can tap into if they aren't working full time, or if they're furloughed completely, but still on the books. And so it's a pretty good deal for an employee that you want to hold on to, but don't have work for at the current time.
Okay, Dave, thanks a lot for that. Hey, Steve, anything you'd like to add to that in terms of how employers should be looking at the situation, analyzing their unique situation, and making some decisions?
Yeah, no, thank you, Austin, and thank you for having us today. The only thing I would say is our work with our clients right now, it's extremely, it's a popular request to be engaged with them and exploring what their options are. And so what we want to try to do now is to make sure that we're vetting all that out and ensuring that we're not just giving them the legislation and having them decide for themselves. So instead, what we're trying to do is educate our business advisors, educate their HR advisors on the nuances of the law, how it applies, and then allow them a chance to kind of customize that to each of our client needs. And then also, what is best for their specific qualifications as well. So we have noticed some trends as well. I think that our clients tend to lean towards pursuing the PPL loan as Dave described. But in addition to that, as more information is coming out on that security tax deferral, that becomes an attractive option as the details have more recently kind of been understood.
Great, thank you very much. Hey, Lisa, I'd like to come back to you and kind of talk about organizational communication. I think it's always something area very, very important. But what are some of the best practices for communicating to the employee community regarding the current state of affairs and their future employment, or just anything that employee connects to their ongoing activity with their employer? And are we looking at a 30, 60, 90-day plan, or what should we be thinking about?
So thanks, Austin. Well, look, I personally don't believe it's ever possible to over communicate. I recommend that every employer develop and follow a communication strategy and change management plan. If you haven't done one yet, you need one during the COVID-19 crisis and for every major message that impacts your business moving forward. The strategy would ensure that you're communicating the most appropriate message to the right parties and at the right time. So it helps you plan ahead. For instance, employers could be conducting frequent leadership team meetings to examine the current state of finances, operations, staffing, and issues impacting their customer relations or customer base. And employers should be providing transparent information about the company and business continuity to leaders and staff. But the amount of details that you share would maybe vary depending upon who your audience is. So you should maintain a regular and predictable cadence of communication for not just employees, current employees, but also your furloughed staff and any laid off workers that you intend to bring back. You know, if you've furloughed or had to lay off workers during this crisis due to the economic conditions, you should want to keep a regular dialogue with them. Make sure that you're reaching out to them and so that when you're ready to reopen or reinstate or restore your operations, these furloughed workers or these laid off workers will want to come back to work for you. It's staying connected with them, keeping them engaged and letting them know that you're a top priority. Well, that makes a big difference in how they feel about the organization, how you treated them, how you took care of them. And they'll want to hang in there with you and be committed to, you know, returning. Otherwise, if you didn't treat them well, they may look elsewhere. But of course, in all communications, especially now, we need to be imploring the importance of like physical distancing, socially connecting, because that makes a big difference in how we're all working remote, practicing good physical as well as mental health hygiene. And then a few other things to consider, like over the next 30, 60, 90 days, that may or may not be communication related, but they're kind of tied to this, is pay careful attention to how you're managing your COVID related HR administration. So that there are requirements for documentation, for tracking, for maintaining records. Make sure that you're handling your requests and tracking the reasons and the evidence, because that protects your business. I also recommend amending and updating your business continuity plan and pandemic response plan. And you're like, hey, we didn't have one of those. Well, then you probably need to start by creating one and then treat it as a living document. So as new issues arise or you experience something that you hadn't before, make sure you're filling in those gaps so that you're staying on top of it so that you're better prepared for the next incident. And then looking ahead, you should already be strategizing and developing a plan for how you're going to return your employees to work. And for that, you have to determine what conditions must be met in order to restore those employees.
So you say conditions. What can you be a little more color around conditions specifically?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of conditions that are being bantied about with from healthcare providers as well as from politicians about whether there will be testing, whether there will be tracking and tracing of employees. When they come back, are you going to be are you going to be monitoring their temperatures? You know, what kind of processes do you need to have in place in order to maintain the security and safety of your employees?
Wow, that's unintended consequences here, definitely.
Yeah.
Hey, Lisa, kind of while we're talking about kind of the health and wellness of the workforce, let's stay on that for a little bit. So, many years ago, I lived in California, and in fact, lived through a couple of the big earthquakes there. The thing that I thought was really, really interesting is when we came back to our high-rise building after the big earthquake. Every time the building shook, it was, I mean, half the floor or half of our employees would leave because there was that emotional connection to the the big earthquake that had happened, a couple days or a couple weeks previously. So, with this event, what kinds of emotional issues should employees be prepared to address as folks return to work?
Yeah, so there's so much uncertainty that's raising the level of fear and anxiety. If you're like me or my husband, it's like, we have a cough for like a moment or two and we start to panic. And so, just those like moments you're like, oh, you go run and check your temperature. So, transition is going to take time, it's going to take patience, and it's going to take some strategy. So what assurances can you give? Well, the first and foremost issue I think that most people have is around that physical safety, feeling that they're protected. So under the OSHA general duty clause, every employer has an obligation to provide a safe workplace. So what does that look like? Well, the things that you need to be implementing if you haven't already, or at least communicating regularly, is that you have a safety plan that it's going to take care of, maybe you have a committee or an officer that's appointed, but informing employees of all the efforts that you're making to ensure physical distancing, whether you're going to need to or have to provide PPE, the protective equipment, or masks, gloves, sanitizing the workplace, providing options for wash stations or hand sanitizers, antibacterial wipes, other sanitizing supplies throughout the workplace, maybe taking temperatures, all that stuff. So those are all the kind of the physical safety things that you're going to have to monitor. But in addition to that, it's those anxieties and fears.
Right.
So I would implement some level of mental health care support. What I see is, and what I hear is, that nearly 20% of us suffer from sort of phobia or fear. Maybe it's OCD, maybe it's panic attacks, or just some level of anxiety. And so, and that's before we had all this. So you can imagine how much worse or things are exacerbated by this kind of condition. So make sure you're providing and promoting your employee assistance program. We keep talking about like mental health care is so important, and there used to be a stigma, and maybe there's, to some extent, there still is a stigma associated with that. So do what you can to destigmatize taking care of your mental health. And focusing on, you may have to give employees more time and space to ease back into the work environment. So not everybody can immediately return to work on the day that you dictate. There may be some employees experiencing their own personal trauma and stress. I had my husband's coworker passed away last week from COVID-19. And so you just don't know how connected you're going to be to a situation and how it's going to impact you or your loved ones or your friends and family. So you have to be responsive to each individual as their own. And people may be apprehensive to return to work. So just don't force it. If you've been working these remote in this remote conditions and it's been working relatively well, you may want to extend that, and we can talk about it later, but probably forever, but extending it at least a lot longer than you maybe had planned to. And then finally, I think leadership is critical at a time like this. So, your organization needs leaders that can articulate the vision and communicate message of unity and togetherness. And so I know I'm sounding a little more touchy-feely than it's probably what you expect from an HR person, but it really matters more now than ever. So good leaders will acknowledge how well your teams they need to acknowledge how well their teams are actually performing remote, and not again resort back to the old ways of doing things. Maybe leaders should wonder, do you need to see your employees every day? Do you have to be in the office? Does everyone have to be in the office in order for you to trust them? That's an issue with the leader. That's not an issue with the team. And
Right.
So, that kind of helps us to vet out some of the poor managers as well. But leaders should be celebrating our ability to be resilient at this time. And we need to hear that. We need team morale. We need to be, and leaders should be transparent, but can also be vulnerable. They should be able to share their own fears and anxieties so that we know that they're all in it together. So it's that sense of belonging.
Well, Lisa, thanks for sharing that. That was really good. So, you mentioned a number of things in terms of kind of what the new working world order will be. So Steve, is there anything else you'd like to kind of tack on to that as it relates to what the new normal will be, or what that looks like from your perspective?
Yeah, thank you, Austin. I mean, first I want to second everything Lisa shared, and then also let me tell you personally, I can relate to the experience in Southern California. I too have survived many of those natural disasters, and then to move to Houston and then experience Harvey and some of the other disasters. There's one common trend related to people's behavior. We kind of go back to that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? That first piece is to better understand first, what are your basic needs? Am I safe? So to reiterate what Lisa said, it's important that we provide as much as we can as business owners, and that sense of safety. And so one of the things that we've been doing is reassuring employees that we're going to sanitize the workplace on a frequent basis. In addition to that, we're evaluating our employee etiquette policies to ensure that people are clear on what appropriate behavior is in the organization. What was once common etiquette, such as a handshake, in the new world might be reevaluated as a society. We have to think about things like that. So beyond the safety, there's also the conditions of money. Is my money okay? Am I going to get a raise? What's going to happen to my bonus? Questions like that have to be evaluated, and they have to be addressed. In addition to that, what about my job? And then once people have started focusing in on themselves, then they naturally migrate out next to, what about my coworkers? What's going on with them? Are they safe? And so what's critical in all of this is for transparent leadership, for all of us to be able to share as much as we know as quickly as we can in an appropriate professional way. And whether the news is good or bad, leaders gain additional degree of respect and admiration, because this is when the culture really comes to life, is in times like these. And these things will be remembered far more than months. It'll be part of the legacy and the fabric, I think, of the company for those that choose to stay around. And as they onboard new employees, they'll speak fondly, if it's handled right, of how, when really it matters, how this company takes care of their people. Or conversely, they won't be around. They'll remember it, and then they'll choose to go elsewhere.
So that's awesome, Steve. Thanks for sharing. So this is kind of one of those cultural defining moments to sort of summarize what you and Lisa just shared, huh?
I think so.
Okay, good. So just as a reminder for those who have just joined, all participants are on mute currently, right in the middle of a great panel discussion. And then if you have any questions or comments, please add them into the chat box, and we promise we'll set some time aside at the end to address your questions and or comments. So I would be committing moderator malpractice if I didn't address some M&A related issues, since we have all these deal makers on the phone. So Dave, right now, for some, it's going to be a great buying opportunity, buying of companies, and maybe owners
Right.
who decided that they want to exit, as well as could, so both sides of the transaction, both buying and selling, this could be a very, maybe not right now, but in the not too distant future, could be very, very, a lot of activity. What should both sides of the transaction be thinking about as we in this potentially, accelerated deal environment?
Right. So definitely there's a lot of talk out there in terms of companies and valuations and all that stuff. And so first, from a buyer's perspective, definitely people are seeing valuations drop given the economic conditions right now. And I mean, just the bottom line is a lot of companies are seeing their revenues dry up. They're seeing declining valuations as a consequence. And so for people that are in the market to buy, they're thinking, wow, I can come in and grab stuff, in a fire sale and make a killing. But the bottom line is, we don't know where things will ultimately end up. And so a word of caution to potential buyers is that they need to incorporate certain clauses into their letters of intent so that they can get out of the deals if things continue to drop more than they're comfortable with from a risk perspective. So for example, I used to do real estate law when I lived in New England, and one of the things that real estate buyers are very familiar with are clauses that enable the company or the buyer to get out of the deal. For example, in places like Massachusetts, where I worked previously, you have people buying homes that are 50 to 100 years old or older. And so you put a clause in that says, hey, this is subject to satisfactory home inspection, because you want to make sure that you uncover any landmines that might be there that could blow up down the road and cause a problem. And so the same thing is true for buying businesses. You want to make sure that in your agreements and your letters of intent, that you are giving yourself a way to get out if things continue to deteriorate more than you're comfortable with. From a seller's perspective, I think the same thing holds true. If you're in a position where you don't absolutely have to sell the business, right now might be a good time to pull it off the market. Again, using real estate as in a parallel type situation, you have people that will list their house, and then if the market starts to drop significantly, they'll pull it off the market because they don't want to lose that much equity, and they have the hope that things will start to turn around. Same thing for a business in general. If you don't absolutely have to sell right now, maybe now isn't the best time, because you're seeing the significant drop in valuations. And even if you have solid fundamentals, you're guilty by association, and so your valuation is dropping too. So it might be a good time to wait and see where things end up ultimately before you put your business on the market. So there's a lot to be considering right now, and again, it could be a great buying opportunity, but just be aware that certain types of businesses are seeing their customer base dry up, or they're seeing a lot of uncertainty, or they're seeing contracts being canceled left and right. And so I think that any buyer really needs to be aware of all of these issues and bake in opportunities to back out of the deal without losing earnest money and other types of commitments, financial commitments that you might make otherwise. So just some of the things to be thinking about.
Thanks. That's great, Dave. Lisa, anything you want to add to that?
So I spent a lot of time doing M&A kind of due diligence, HR compliance. So I always, my mind always immediately goes to like the inherent employment related risks that when you have so many employment laws that can derail your M&A deals. So with the additional laws and regulations that have just been developed and the drastic measures that some companies have had to resort to in order to stay in business, it's hard to predict what future litigation may stem from it, but I would be thinking about, like, there's a bunch of unknowns out there, like the potential employment related risks. So if a target company had not applied the new leaves of absence correctly, or messed up by reducing hours for exempt employees. So you may not be taking that deep a dive when you typically do your due diligence, but I'm recommending you do. So use an HR professional who knows to kind of vet some of that information out. And, you know, and of course the impact that culture has on M&A, it can make or break a deal. So employees working for a target company faced with an otherwise uncertain future might be a little more welcoming and accepting and embracing of change by the potential, you know, buyer. Because, you know, that's the only option that they have available to them. But there's also the other situation where employees may feel drawn more closer to their current employer, the target company, and there may be a commitment and trust that you know, might be exploited if they're not included in knowing that this acquisition could be coming. And so you run the risk of hurting in the employee sentiment and retention during the deal or right after.
Okay, good. Thanks for sharing that, Lisa. So just switching gears just a little bit, and we kind of talked about some of this earlier, but this is around cultural norms. So can we share, you know, where are some of those new cultural norms, both good and bad, that we're going to see or starting to see as a result of this. Steve, why don't you go first?
Yeah, no, thank you, Austin. And I think part of the thing that a situation like this does is it reveals a culture. And so with that, you need to better understand, do you have a clearly defined culture? And if it does, it shows up in times like this. And so I'm proud to say I work for a company that, in the midst of all of this, we have values, and we call them living, breathing values, one of which is to lead by example, and another is to put other people first. And so our leadership, our owners have elected to not take a salary until all of this is behind them. In addition to that, our executives have elected to do a 25% pay cut until this is behind them. And it sends a powerful message to the rest of the company. And it also has invoked in them, what can I do to help? As a result of this, we've seen our service level scores significantly increase, our satisfaction scores of our employees increase because they feel valued. And so to me, I think you get a chance, as unpleasant as a situation like this is to demonstrate through action that you genuinely care about people. And when you do, it comes out. And I think that the legacy and the long-term impact will be there as well. More broadly, it's a chance for us as a country, really, to take a look at how work is done. I think it's an opportunity to break down the silos, to increase systems thinking, and to be able to partner together in a different way. We are going to be doing remote work now more than ever, and when you are communicating in that regard, timeliness and responsiveness is even more important. And so I think that we'll see as ramped up as our service expectations are, I think we'll continue to see those increase as well.
Great. So let's stay with that a little bit. So kind of the next question dovetails nicely off of that one. So now we know before the pandemic hit, we had some historically low unemployment rates. At the same time, depending on the polls you read, the workplace was largely disengaged. Expectation of these, in some cases, unrealistic requests for benefits and entitlements and accommodations and that sort of thing. So what do you think will happen in the next 12 to 18 months as we, who knows what the unemployment rate is going to shift to and that sort of thing? I'm asking you to dust off your crystal ball a little bit on this one.
Yeah,
I have on that, but Lisa, would you like to go first?
Oh, no, go ahead, Steve.
Well, I mean, first, the projections are that unemployment can be, upwards of 20%. And so when we take a look at what the cultural norms are going to be and what unemployment's going to be and how we're going to react to entitlements and all of that, I do suspect that some will be grateful to have a job, but they're also going to remember how all of this happened. And if they aren't treated well and they don't feel safe and they feel like, people are not doing all that they can to be considerate of reasonable requests when the shelter-in-place situations lift, then they're going to remember that, right? And it isn't just going to be a day or two or a week or a month. It's going to be for the remainder of their career. And so it's really our chance to really be cautious, lead by example, but also recognize that these things have a place. And that's when people choose that discretionary effort, is when they feel like they're genuinely cared for. You can make a person do their job, but beyond that extra effort requires that connection at a personal level. And Lisa, I know this is a passion point for you, so I bet you've got some other points as well, right?
Come on, Lisa.
I don't know that mine's much more predictive of the future, but I just look at let's just talk about engagement for a minute. So, my go-tos for employee engagement are the Gallup American Workplace Report, and then a gentleman named Marcus Buckingham, who has a global study on what drives employee engagement. And so those two factors, and this is pre-pandemic nightmares for me, because employee engagement from the Gallup poll has been hovering around 1/3 of the workforce. So that means 2/3 of us are disengaged, or even actively disengaged. And this was before the pandemic. So you'd like to think that, this new sense of belonging, this new wow, holy heck, what just happened to us, will raise our awareness and draw us more attentive to the needs of having this employment situation work in our favor instead of against us. But Marcus Buckingham takes it even to a more drastic measure and says that it's only about 15% of global workers who are highly engaged. So, I mean, that's money out the door already. And so we have to find a way to get employees re-engaged. And so what I like most about Marcus Buckingham's study is he was able to pinpoint the primary motivating factor of engagement over and above any other factors. And that was feeling like a part of a team. And so now more than ever, as we're working remote, we're struggling to try to find ways to communicate and collaborate. But this is our time to shine, because if we can get that done well and get people to collaborate and work together remotely, we'll think about how much better it'll be when we do come back together. But feeling like a part of a team, and the more teams you feel a part of, whether it's a task force here or this project team over there, the more teams you feel a part of, the more highly engaged you are. And so that's important for an employer, because highly engaged teams perform astronomically higher and are more productive than regular teams. So if you can get to that level, whether you're getting a more collaborative group, or if you start to look at how you're going to reinvent yourselves, start looking at how you can form teams, employee teams. I think that's going to be critical for us. And when you do get back to work, when you have this kind of scenario where we're all in it together and people feel that sense of belonging and they're on this team environment, they're more likely to kind of ramp up a lot faster. And you'll find that the people that you may have lost in the mix, who maybe continue to be actively disengaged, you're not going to miss them and you're not going to need them.
Lisa, thanks for sharing that. In fact, I was supposed to give a talk at an HR conference next month. That was going to be my talk, building highly effective virtual teams. Unfortunately, it was canceled. So is there maybe one or two things that you can share that really sort of become cornerstones of building that highly effective virtual team?
So, I have a unique perspective because I've been a fully remote worker for the last 2 years. And up until recently.
Oh, so that's right. You're working from Bora Bora based on your landscape there, right?
Beautiful.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Just making sure.
Yeah. Of course, why wouldn't you? But because of that perspective, I can say some people do it really well and some people don't do it well. And I've had the experience where now when you're forced to do it, a lot of companies were hesitant because for whatever reason, they felt that they couldn't trust employees to deliver. And I think we're seeing now that it's actually working extremely well. But there's some critical, components that you have to have. You have to have, and I think practically. So you have to have the tools and resources to be able to function appropriately. So everyone who needs access to the online systems and resources, it needs to be set up properly. You need to be able to access policies and processes. You may not have your binders, if you're old school like me, your binders or paperwork that's readily available. So you need to be able to get access to that stuff quickly. The technology, just having the hardware. I believe it's in the IRS section 139 is a disaster recovery section. It started right after 9/11, but it is now applicable now to the pandemic. So it actually allows employers to pay for employees to have access to the tools and resources that they need to work from home. So if you didn't have laptops before, you can pay for employees to have laptops now. Well, why would an employer want to do that? Well, it's fully deductible. And for the employee, this is an opportunity where you can get tax-free benefits. So it's something to explore. But the technology, the hardware, the cybersecurity and data protection, those are critical. You need to make sure you're protecting your employment data. And then you're competing with bandwidth and Wi-Fi. You might have, a kid who's online wanting to watch, YouTube videos, or and you're still trying to run a Zoom meeting and your neighbor across the street is doing something. So you're all competing for that neighborhood bandwidth. But, you know, working on deadlines and deliverables, make sure that you're, you know, you're still tracking, you're still holding people accountable the way you need to. The setup in context is that not everyone will have a smooth transition working from home. Not everybody has a private workspace where they can be, where you don't have dogs barking or you don't have kids interrupting you. So just, you know, be empathetic and understand that some people struggle with isolation. You know, the workplace might have been a necessary buffer for employees who needed time away from home for whatever stresses they may have been dealing with. And so now that's been taken away from them. And that, in my own experiences, there's something called remote paranoia. And it happens when you don't hear from your leaders for weeks sometimes or days, and you start to fill in the gaps of, oh, they haven't talked to me for a while, so maybe they're plotting to get rid of me. And it's true, it's a horrible feeling. And so you have to stay connected. So again, that predictable, consistent communication, having a regular cadence established so that people know to expect when to hear from you, and keep that dialogue fresh, and understand and recognize that remote work, when it does work well, actually increases the level of employee engagement.
Great, thank you. Wow, that's a lot. I appreciate you sharing that. So now, Steve, I gotta ask a tough question. So
Yeah, that's all right.
Lisa had all the right answers. So what's going on there at headquarters? What are you guys doing to facilitate that remote working environment?
I appreciate the question, and you know, to be honest, remote work is going quite well for us, but we also have to recognize that in the long haul, it can create some loneliness. It can create that isolation that Lisa just referred to. So to combat that, there are really 5 different things that we've done that have seemed to really work. One is an email every single day since our employees have worked remotely from our Vice President of HR. And so every day it's a different topic, but at a high level it centers around health and well-being, around wellness, around reminders of the resources that our employees have, such as EAP. There's links to the CDC. There was a funny little anecdotal story about our VP's experience of remote work and how she struggled with managing the personal and the interpersonal relationships. So that's one, is the daily email. Second is huddles. As Lisa and Dave, I believe, have both referred to the importance of managers communicating more now with their people. And so we've asked all managers to communicate to their employees in a quick vote meeting every day, just to check in what's going on, what needs to be done, what was accomplished, what obstacles got in your way. So just real quick that way. And then another one is our HR department is also calling each employee. How are you doing? How is your family doing? And just showing that genuine care and having those conversations. Another thing is, one of our teams even did a mindfulness meditation exercise. I mean, they're dealing with a lot of stress, and so they brought everybody in and they went through some breathing exercises and allowed them to kind of reset for 30 minutes, which seemed to go over very well. And then finally, one thing that we did on our intranet was we gave people an opportunity to show their colleagues what their home office looked like. And so employees participated on showing what their offices looked like. It was fun to see how many people were proud of the giant monitors or the different things they did, or they showed their kids or their dogs working alongside them. And so that sense of virtual community was shared as well, which is a lot of fun. And so it's bringing that connectedness, that sense of one, to lessen some of that fear and isolation. And those things have worked pretty well so far.
But Steve, thanks for sharing that. I'm glad to see you practicing what you preach. That's always good. So let me do a little follow-on question here. So a lot of the companies that I've talked to, some of the owners and managers, leaders, they struggle with productivity. Now I've heard productivity. I've heard some people talk about they've experienced 40% productivity gains since people have been working home, and then others have said productivity's fallen off. So how do we engage people or address the productivity conundrum.
Yeah. Directed at me, Austin?
Yeah, Steve, yeah, why don't you take that, or for anybody who
Yeah,
would like to
so
answer.
I'm happy to respond, and then Dave, Lisa, if you'd like to respond beyond mine, that's welcome too. In terms of productivity, I would say, Austin, that our experience is that we focus on the result, not necessarily how our employees get there. And that's why what we do is we focus on what our goals are, and then people reporting their progress to that. We have a client relationship management software, and so that dramatically tracks time and progress and communication internally. And the truth is that people who don't have to hassle with the commute and aren't troubled by a lot of the other distractions, and there's sometimes good distractions, but there are distractions around the water cooler at the workplace, don't have to deal with that. So the truth is that I don't typically work from home, but since I have started working from home, I get 3 hours back in the day. I live in Kingwood, and I commute to Katy every single day. That's an hour and a half each way, and I'm spending that time working. So they're getting at least 2 to 3 more hours out of the day.
I hope your boss is tuned into our session here today. David, anything you'd like to tack on to that?
I would just add that it really opens up an opportunity for companies to reevaluate the typical, this is the way we've always done things. As you look at more companies, in the past, they were always like, no, we don't want people working remote just because. And now that they've been forced to allow that type of work, it's really opened the eyes of a lot of companies to recognize that we can get the job done, and we don't need to manage by bodies in chairs and being able to see the people are there. What they're finding is that for some employees, they're more productive, as was mentioned, and they get more done without all the distractions that arise when you have a bunch of people in one place. And so it opens up an opportunity for companies to look at what is the new norm? How are they going to measure productivity, which you brought up? Maybe it's not people in chairs anymore. Maybe it's now, hey, these are the 5 projects we have to get done this week. Did we get them done? And it doesn't matter, or it shouldn't matter where people are to get that work done, as long as we get the work done. And so it opens our eyes to looking at new ways of measuring productivity and measuring employee effectiveness and capabilities, and it forces us to manage by metrics that actually matter, as opposed to some of the more old school ways of looking at things that, if everyone's here on time, that's what matters, when in reality that really isn't a good measurement of productivity. So this is actually a good opportunity for companies to reevaluate some of the key things that they used to look at as metrics, and start to look at things that are actually more relevant.
Okay, great. Appreciate you sharing that. For me, this pandemic became real when Tillman Fertitta laid off 40,000 people. I think the number was 45,000 people in one week. I mean, just mind-boggling numbers. But so when people start to return to the workplace, what are going to be some of the major? Lisa, maybe you can take this. What are going to be some of the major challenges companies are going to encounter as they bring people back into the workplace?
So I'm a very practical person. So I immediately think, okay, well, start with a process. So from an administrative perspective, you need to decide how you're going to reinstate your workers. For instance, if they, do you have a cutoff date? And it's, to me, means that if you return your workers within 30 days, let's say, from the date that they were originally laid off or furloughed, do you need to complete rehire paperwork all over again? Or are they reinstated with the same benefits as they had before? Maybe you just have them fill out some kind of return to work notice. what's your cutoff date, and when is it, maybe it's over 30 days that you say, okay, well, we have to rehire them through new paper processing or online processing. And do they get to reapply for benefits? Do they get to pick a whole different type of benefit plan option? You should check your handbook to see if you have policy on bridging employees' time, because some companies will say if you leave their in place of employment and you come back within 6 months or within a year, we'll bridge your time so you haven't lost any seniority with regard to pay, PTO. And I know Dave and I were talking about this yesterday, but Dave, you want to talk about like what kind of could happen with PTO in California?
Yeah, so for any company in California, one of the issues is, I mentioned earlier about how employees that are furloughed, as opposed to being laid off, excuse me, most companies are able to, in most states, are able to put them on furlough, but they're still an employee. In California, if you have somebody furloughed for more than 30 days, the current best practice recommendation is that you treat that as a termination for purposes of paying out a final paycheck and accrued unused PTO. And so you've got an employee that you've furloughed, and 35 days later you decide you're going to bring them back, but you've already paid out their PTO. So now your bookkeeping is going to look different for your California employees than it is anywhere else in the country, because they're starting over again. So you need to think about policies like, do you have a waiting period before PTO kicks in? Do you, how do you handle the documentation, like the I-9 forms, and when they've been treated as if they were terminated? So California is a little tricky and different than we see in these other states, and you just need to be aware of that. In general, documentation is an issue if they were laid off, but it's been less than a year, and it's somebody that you already onboarded previously, then that's going to have an impact on whether or not you need to go through the whole I-9 documentation process again. So there's those types of considerations that employers need to keep in mind.
Right. Thanks so much. Appreciate the sharing that. Hey, Gretchen, let's. I'm going to flip it to you. Maybe we could take a few of the questions we have in the chat room there.
Sure. Thanks again. So one of the first questions that came up was what changes in payroll or PTO systems that clients have should or must be changed in order to comply with the paid sick leave requirements. I feel like either one of us could answer that question. I know internally we've made special codes for that, but there's probably a few more points our HR experts would have to add to that.
Dave, you want to take that? Yeah.
So just to make sure I have it right, so they're asking about how to handle PTO if somebody is, for example, home because they're a non-essential employee, or if you could give me a little more background, Gretchen.
Okay, so it was a very general question. So I guess that answer does require, again, see, these experts know these things. But there's more to it than a yes or no question, I guess. So it kind of depends, is what you're saying. It would depend on whether or not the person is taking paid leave for the COVID sick paid leave, or if it's a childcare related. So all those different things are in play. Is that what you're saying,
Yeah,
Dave?
I mean, it really depends when you look at that. One of the things that the FFCRA made clear is that employers can't force employees to use their PTO. So if they are getting the emergency paid sick leave for one of the 6 reasons set out in the FFCRA, they don't have to use their PTO for that, and the employer can't force that. Now, if they have, beyond those 2 weeks of emergency paid sick leave, if they don't have a minor child at home because of COVID reasons, then they don't qualify for the paid family medical leave. So after those 2 weeks, they're out of luck, and they may want to say, look, I'm not comfortable coming in right now, even though our company is considered essential, and so I'd rather use some of my PTO. Then that's a legitimate reason that an employer needs to let them use it. But if they're being furloughed, for example, because there's no work, and the employer would rather do that than lay people off completely, then it's really up to the employer whether or not they want to approve the use of PTO for that, so they can get some pay for the number of days that they have. We've got clients that have decided not to allow PTO during the furlough, and others that are letting people use up whatever they've accrued, recognizing that later in the year they're not going to have any because they've already used it up. So it's really up to the employer in terms of how they apply PTO usage, but they need to make sure that they're doing it consistently and fairly, so that they're later on they don't have to deal with charges of discriminatory practices.
And I guess the second component to that would be just the fact that those do qualify towards some tax credits in the future if they are required or have the need to pay that emergency paid sick leave or FMLA. Right. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah. So if they are paying out emergency paid sick leave or paid family medical leave, then those payouts will be 100% reimbursed up to the amount that the FFCRA lays out. So if an employer is paying more than is discussed under the FFCRA, they won't get reimbursed for that. But for up to those amounts laid out in that law, they will be 100% reimbursed through their quarterly tax filing.
And Gretchen, just on the coding that you mentioned, coding is important for tracking purposes, but you want to have codes that are specific to each of the there's 6 different available or scenarios where the paid sick leave option is available. And so, and it matters as to which scenario applies, because employees are paid out a different rate depending upon which of those 6 categories apply to them. So you may get a maximum of up to $511 per day for those 2 weeks or 80 hours, or depending upon if you're staying home because, or if you're taking the emergency paid sick leave because you are needed to care for a child who didn't have childcare or a school available. It caps that at $200 a day rate. So you need to have specific codes for each of those scenarios.
Thank you. Another one that came over that I know that there's a couple of these. There are a lot of it depends. So I'm sending the ones now that I think aren't depends, but I might be corrected. This one I think Steve will probably answer because of his background with the training and so forth and leadership. It's in regards to employee performance evaluation in a world of remote working. What to think about this, or what can we do? How does this change, and what are your thoughts on that process for remote working?
Yeah, thank you, Gretchen. I mean, in my mind, it doesn't change, right? I mean, earlier we talked about the importance of focusing in on the result and allowing people the flexibility and autonomy to figure it out to get the job done. And in when we specifically look at Q1 efforts, if we're reviewing those, then you think January and February and half of March we really weren't impacted, at least in Texas, by COVID-19. And so the bulk of that quarter has transpired without any disruption. And so it would be, I think, a disservice to employees not to evaluate their performance. But also, we need to factor in what are our annual goals, and are they do they need to be reevaluated and recalibrated based on the circumstances? But we really should be having conversations, in fact, more conversations with our employees about their performance now than ever. Another thing that's important to note is that it's not the time to shy away from difficult conversations with people who are underperforming either. Those conversations need to take place, and hopefully you've been documenting all along, but if not, then, obviously now it would be a good time for a difficult conversation, if properly documented, to move people out of the organization. Businesses are asked to make some difficult choices, and at this point, we need to make sure that we're recognizing and rewarding those that are stepping up, and for those that are not, they need to be held accountable. And so the key is, do people care what I'm doing, and am I doing what I should be doing? And have we set clear expectations and rewarded or coached people along the way? And so in my mind, it's really, really important that we get these done. And again, hopefully you've got a performance management system that facilitates this process. But if not, then you can still do it through a Zoom meeting or through email and a phone conversation.
Thanks, Steve. Hey, Gretchen, I think we have time for one more question, then we're going to go ahead and wrap it up.
Okay, well, there's been a few good questions, so I'll follow up with FAQ if I can on some of these, or clarify with you.
That'd be great.
As well. One of the questions that I think a lot of people might be asking is where can laid off or furloughed employees go to help for navigating the options they have for assistance? This one is, it depends, because unemployment is based on a few factors, but I think that's something we can answer. So I guess that, either one, Dave or Lisa, would you prefer to answer that question?
So for unemployment, it's hard if you're lucky enough to be able to get through on one of the phone lines, that's part of the challenge. But I have known some success where employers call the unemployment division on behalf of their staff, especially if they're going to lay off employees en masse. And so to negotiate with an employer can benefit employees. They can maybe fast track the process. So that might be one way to do it. So if you're an employer listening and you're looking at potentially laying off folks, you might want to make the call on behalf of your employees. There's different ways that you can accomplish that.
Great. Well, hey, this has been fabulous. And boy, I think we could probably go another couple hours easily on this very, very important and relevant topic. But we'll just set the stage for more excitement 2 weeks from now when we do it all over again. So at this time, I'd like to flip the console to Mike Dahlke so he can wrap things up for us this afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, panel. It's been very insightful.
You're welcome. Thanks for the offer to participate.
Absolutely. Mike,
Thank
are
you.
you off? Thank you. Mike, are you off mute?
I'm off mute. I want to add my thanks to Austin's thanks to the GNA folks. Very engaging conversation, and you're right, we could go on and on. My notes go all the way down the end of the page, and I haven't even tossed some of the questions out, but the very, very interesting couple of things. First of all, thanks beyond the GNA folks to Austin for helping organize this, Kyle for helping with the video, Bob Benson and George Kariski, our conscience and keeping us thinking of ways we can help both the community and our participants. Thank everybody involved. You touched on a couple things in the questions in the presentation discussion that are the keys behind the M&A Forum, which are so-called net weaving and servant leadership. You have a lot of discussion about that and how important that is right now. Net weaving is about building trusted relationships, and there is so much, I don't know, whether it's psychological, it's physical, it's financial right now that has been exposed in a sense because of the virus. It's opened some opportunities, hopefully, for people to think about work in a different way. Clearly have to. But as we get through this, it strikes me that as business leaders, need to stay close. That's why it's so important to have the trusted relationships. Stay close with your human resource professional, stay close with your attorney, stay close with your banker, your accountant, and you'll be able at the point as you reopen to rely on them, because there are practical questions and there are intense legal questions. I just think about all of the all of the issues somebody touched on a while ago about, discrimination when people come back, and all of this kind of stuff is going to be very important. Providing a safe workplace, very important. So the discussion was eye-opening in that regard, and I appreciate you guys' time. I really do. Look forward to getting together with everybody 2 weeks from today. We're trying to talk about some of, let's call them the financial aspects of the time we're going through, financing and financial aspects of COVID-19, I guess. So, Bob, do you have anything to add before we sign off?
Well, of course, I'd like to add my thanks to the G&A people for an outstanding job, and Austin also for an outstanding job moderating. I hope we can. William has come in. I hope we can have as great quality going forward as we had today. Thank you, guys. It was outstanding, and looking forward to the next one.
Leave it to you to sign off, Austin.
Great. Hey, well, again, I'm just going to echo what was said before. Thank you so much to the G&A team for putting together an excellent discussion on this very, very important topic. And boy, I said I'd love to have you back, but I don't want this thing to run on too much longer. Or maybe when you come back, we'll talk about the recovery. How's that, guys? So again, let's all right, very good. All right, MA Forum members, so we'll look for your in your email boxes. We're going to have another session in a couple weeks, and look forward to having you once again. Everybody have a great afternoon, and thanks for participating.
Stay safe.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
Bye.